A mother and son vanished on Oregon's highway in 1992. 26 years later, a demolition crew found this. In the warm summer of 1992, the long stretch of Oregon's Highway 20 looked peaceful, almost sleepy, as if nothing unusual could ever happen there. The pine trees stood tall on both sides of the road. The wind made soft sounds through their branches, and sunlight flickered between the leaves like moving gold. Anyone driving there would think it was just another quiet day. But for one mother and her young son, this road would become the center of a mystery that lasted more than 2 decades. On a Saturday afternoon in late July, 32-year-old Linda Carver buckled her 7-year-old son, Evan, into the back seat of her blue compact car. They had just finished visiting Linda's parents, who lived in a small rural town outside Bend. It had been a simple, happy visit. Linda's mother had cooked Evan's favorite meal, and Linda's father had taught him how to skip stones across the small pond behind their house. Before leaving, Evan hugged his grandparents tightly, promising he would come again soon. Linda smiled at the scene, touched by how close her son felt to her family. Linda herself was known for her gentle personality. She was a single mother working at a local daycare center, where children loved her calm voice and warm smile. She often said her greatest joy was watching Evan grow into a curious, kind-hearted boy. Evan, with his dark hair and bright eyes, was full of questions about animals, stars, cars, and everything else he noticed in the world. He especially loved car rides with his mother. He would look out the window and ask her about the trees, the clouds, or the shape of a passing hill. The two were heading home to Albany, about 2 hours away. Linda wanted to reach the city before sunset because she didn't like driving in the dark. She checked her fuel, adjusted her mirrors, and made sure Evan had his favorite picture book next to him. Everything seemed completely normal when they pulled onto the highway. Nothing gave any sign that this would be the last time anyone saw them alive. The highway wasn't very crowded that day. A few travelers later reported seeing Linda's blue sedan around mile marker 118. One driver remembered her because she was going at a steady, safe speed, unlike many others rushing along the route. Another person remembered the way her son's face was pressed against the window, watching the trees flash by. These tiny details would later become important to investigators, but at the time, they were just ordinary moments. As the afternoon moved toward evening, the sky turned a soft orange. The shadows in the forest grew longer, stretching across the road like dark fingers. The air cooled slightly, and a few clouds wandered across the sky. Nothing unusual occurred. No storms, no road closures, no signs of danger. Linda kept both hands on the wheel, humming softly to a tune on the radio. She would sometimes glance at Evan through the rear-view mirror, smiling when she saw him absorbed in his book. But after that point, no one could say for sure what happened next. When the pair didn't return home that evening, Linda's sister grew concerned. It wasn't like Linda to ignore calls or disappear without notice. At first, the family hoped she had simply stopped at a friend's house or decided to stay overnight with their parents again. But when Linda's parents confirmed she had left hours earlier, worry quickly turned into fear. The next morning, Linda's sister contacted the police. Officers began by checking common routes, gas stations, and nearby towns. They asked people if they had seen the blue sedan. Some had, but all sightings stopped around the same area of Highway 20. That section of road, surrounded by thick forest and sharp curves, had a reputation for being difficult to search. Still, officers walked miles of ground, hoping to spot tire marks, broken branches, or anything that suggested a car had gone off the road. Days passed, and search teams expanded their efforts. Helicopters flew over the tree canopy, scanning for reflective metal or anything that could look like a crashed vehicle. Volunteers joined, walking along steep hillsides and rocky edges. But the land was full of hidden dips and thick brush that made it almost impossible to see what lay beneath. Even trained searchers admitted that a car could easily disappear into the dense vegetation without leaving a clear sign behind. Despite all efforts, no trace of the car appeared. The absence of any clue only deepened the mystery. How could a mother and child simply vanish on a public highway in broad daylight? Linda's family struggled to understand it. Each time the phone rang, they hoped for news, but the calls were always the same. "We're still searching. There's nothing yet." The media soon picked up the story. Local newspapers printed Linda's photo, A young woman with soft brown hair, friendly eyes, and a smile that made people instantly feel at ease. Next to her picture was Evans, bright-eyed and cheerful. Reporters described them as a close, loving pair who had no reason to disappear intentionally. The community responded with sympathy. Strangers joined search efforts, brought food to volunteers, and offered support to Linda's heartbroken family. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, the hope of finding them grew dimmer. Each passing season made it less likely the car would be discovered by chance. Winter covered the land with snow, making searches even more difficult. Spring returned with new plant growth that hid the ground even more. Year after year, Highway 20 continued to carry travelers and vacationers, but the story of the missing mother and son quietly faded from everyday conversation. Still, Linda's family never stopped thinking of her. Her sister kept a small framed picture of Linda and Evan on her living room table. Sometimes she would place fresh flowers beside it, as if offering a gentle reminder that they were still missing, still waiting to come home. Linda's parents grew older, their hope mixed with sadness. They would sit on their porch during warm evenings, staring down the road, imagining a day when someone might finally find an answer. As time passed, the story took on a strange kind of life. People in nearby towns whispered about the mystery whenever they drove past that part of the highway. Some believed the car had gone off the road into a hidden ravine. Others wondered if the pair had met someone along the way who led them away from safety. There were even a few imaginative tales that suggested they had started a new life somewhere far away, though no real evidence ever supported this idea. The truth was simple: no one knew. The unsolved disappearance also weighed on police officers who had worked the case. Some of them said it was one of the most puzzling they had ever seen. They had searched areas thoroughly, reviewed maps, spoken to experts, and even examined old construction plans, but the mystery stayed closed, as if the land itself had swallowed the truth. One investigator later admitted that the case never left his mind, even years after he retired. 26 years is a long time to wait for answers. Over that period, the world changed. New families moved into the area. Roads were repaired, widened, or rerouted. New technology improved search methods, but since no one knew exactly where to look, the mystery remained untouched. And yet, even after so many years, the memory of Linda and Evan never disappeared completely. In quiet moments, their family members would picture them laughing during that last visit, the way Evan held his grandfather's hand, or the gentle tone of Linda's voice when she said goodbye. These memories were all they had left to hold on to, and they protected them carefully. On the surface, Highway 20 looked peaceful as always, with tall trees and winding curves that carried travelers to their destinations. But hidden beneath the calm scenery was a question that had never been answered. Somewhere along that long stretch of road, a truth waited quietly, undisturbed, untouched, and unseen. No one knew that the clue everyone had searched for was still there, buried deep below a layer of soil and time. No one imagined that a future construction project would one day uncover something that had remained hidden for so long. The disappearance of Linda and her son seemed like an unfinished story, suspended in time. Their loved ones continued to hold on to hope, even if it was small. The mystery lingered in the air like a quiet echo, waiting patiently for the moment when the earth itself would finally give up its secret. For many years after Linda and Evan disappeared, life continued moving forward for everyone else, but for their family, time felt strangely frozen. Each day seemed to bring the same unanswered questions, the same quiet hopes, and the same heavy silence. Even after months passed, and the world began treating the case as something unsolvable, the people close to the mother and son could not accept that their story had simply ended with no explanation. Linda's sister, Rachel, found it especially hard to let go. She was only a few years younger than Linda, and the two had always shared a close bond. They used to talk on the phone almost every afternoon, even if it was only for a few minutes. Rachel missed that familiar sound, the soft rhythm of her sister's voice, the way she would laugh at simple things, the way she would tell funny stories about Evan's latest curiosity. Losing both of them at once felt like losing a part of herself. In the early months following the disappearance, Rachel visited the highway area several times. She would park her car near the mile marker where Linda had last been seen and simply stand there, looking at the long, empty road stretching into the distance. The tall trees made gentle rustling sounds, almost as if whispering something she couldn't quite hear. She hoped that by being there, she might sense something, anything, that could help her understand what had happened. But each visit left her with the same ache, the same confusion, and the same longing for answers. As the first year passed, the case slowly lost its place in the front pages of newspapers. Other news stories took over and people moved on. But for those who cared about Linda and Evan, the mystery never became smaller. It became a constant shadow, following them quietly into every family gathering, every holiday, and every ordinary day. One of the people who struggled with the case the most was a retired state trooper named David Monroe. He had been one of the main investigators in the early search efforts. When he first heard about the missing mother and child, he had approached the case with confidence. He believed that with enough time and effort, they would find the car, understand what happened, and bring closure to the family. But as the days turned into weeks and no progress was made, something inside him changed. He realized that the land around Highway 20 held secrets more deeply than he had imagined. Even after retirement, the case stayed with him. Sometimes, while sitting on his porch on quiet evenings, he would replay the search in his mind. Every map he had studied, every area they had checked, every conversation he had with search teams. He wondered if there was something they had missed, a detail too small to notice back then, but important enough to make a difference. He carried that thought with him for years, almost like a personal promise that he would never fully stop thinking about the mother and child whose story had never found its ending. Meanwhile, Linda's parents aged with the slow, steady passing of time. They tried to remain hopeful, but each year made it a little harder. Still, they kept Linda's room just the way she left it. Her favorite books were neatly lined on the shelf. Her framed photographs, one of her smiling at her high school graduation, another holding baby Evan in her arms, remained exactly where they had always been. Her parents would sometimes sit quietly in the room, feeling close to her in the only way they still could. For Evan, they kept a small collection of his belongings. His grandfather had carefully stored the toy cars he loved so much in a wooden box. His grandmother kept his drawings, a colorful mix of houses, animals, and scribbled shapes. She had once pinned them proudly on her fridge, and though the paper had grown old and yellowed over time, she kept every single one. As the years passed and the case became older, new investigators occasionally reviewed it. Technology improved. Mapping tools became sharper. Drones became available, and people suggested using them to scan the forested areas. But each time a new idea came up, the excitement eventually faded. The land was simply too large, too deep, and too wild. There were valleys covered in thick brush, steep drop-offs hidden by trees, and old construction areas that had been changed many times. Even with progress in tools, no one knew where to look. Sometimes the community brought the case back into conversation. A reporter working on a local documentary once reached out to the family, asking if they wanted to share their story. The family appreciated the kindness but declined. After so many years, they didn't want the story to become a form of entertainment. They wanted peace, not attention. Still, the case remained one of those stories people remembered. When travelers passed through the area, they sometimes recalled hearing about the missing mother and son from decades earlier. Some would mention it quietly while driving past certain turns, feeling a mix of sadness and curiosity. The story had become part of the quiet history of the area, one of those mysteries that stayed alive in people's minds even after the official search had faded away. Not far from the highway, life continued as it always had. Seasons changed, bringing new colors to the landscape. Snow covered the hills in winter and fresh green returned each spring. Trees grew taller, their roots spreading deeper into the earth. The forest, unaware of the mystery it held, simply went on growing. By the time the disappearance reached its 20th year, many people assumed that the truth might never be known. Some mysteries, they thought, remained mysteries forever. But that thought never felt completely right to Linda's family. They believed that somewhere, hidden in the vast landscape, the answer still existed. It was simply waiting for the right moment to be uncovered. At times, Rachel found small comfort in remembering the last moments she spent with Linda. She remembered how they laughed together at a silly joke. She remembered how Linda fixed a loose button on Evan's shirt and kissed him on the forehead before leaving. These memories played like gentle films in her mind, offering warmth despite all the sadness. The pain never truly disappeared, but with time she learned to carry it more quietly. One autumn evening, years after the disappearance, Rachel found herself looking through an old photo album. She flipped through pictures of holidays, birthdays, and family trips. She paused at a picture of Linda holding baby Evan, both smiling in bright sunlight. She felt tears rise but didn't wipe them away. Instead, she let them fall softly like a quiet rain. She whispered aloud, as if speaking to them, "I'll never stop hoping to know where you are." Her words reflected the same thoughts carried by many others connected to the case. Friends, co-workers, and even people who had never met Linda felt touched by the story. Something about a mother and child simply vanishing without explanation made the mystery feel personal, like a question that lingered in everyone's heart. Meanwhile, along Highway 20, small changes continued. Construction crews occasionally repaired damaged portions of the road or improved drainage areas. Signs were replaced. Pavement was renewed. But none of these small changes brought the truth any closer to the surface. The land remained quiet, holding its secret with a patience only nature could keep. Years later, new families moved into the towns nearby. Many of them never heard of the disappearance unless they came across old newspaper clippings or heard someone mention it while driving along the highway. But even those who didn't know the story could feel that the land had a depth to it. There was something old and quiet in the air, a feeling that many stories had passed through the place, some known and some forever hidden. One day, during a community gathering, an elderly man approached Rachel. He had lived in the area for decades and remembered when the disappearance first happened. He told her, in a gentle voice, that he still prayed for answers. His small act of kindness brought Rachel a rare moment of comfort. It reminded her that she was not alone in carrying the weight of the past. Even though the mystery remained unsolved, people continued to hope, not loudly but in small, quiet ways. They believed that if something was hidden, it might someday come to light. They believed that life had a way of revealing truths when the time was right. Over the years, Linda and Evan became symbols of unanswered questions, of love that endured, and of quiet hope that refused to fade. Their story stayed alive in the hearts of those who knew them and those who simply felt touched by their disappearance. And though no new evidence surfaced for more than 2 decades, a sense of quiet expectation lingered in the background of the community. It was almost as if the land was waiting, too, waiting for the right moment, the right shift, the right turn of events. Something deep beneath the surface remained undisturbed but not gone. It would take a future day, a moment no one could predict, for that hidden truth to finally rise into the open. No one knew that a simple construction project many years later would become the key that changed everything. No one imagined that a crew working on a routine road improvement would soon uncover something that had been buried for so long. And no one realized that the long, painful silence surrounding the disappearance was slowly beginning to move, like the very first breeze before a coming storm. Not a dangerous storm, but one that brings long-awaited answers. The years of unanswered questions, quiet hopes, and unending patience were slowly leading toward a moment of discovery. It had just taken 26 years for the path to finally begin revealing itself. 26 years had passed since Linda and her young son, Evan, disappeared, yet the world seemed unaware of how much time had quietly flowed by. Seasons had changed again and again, people had grown older, and new families had begun lives along the stretch of Oregon's Highway 20. To most travelers, it was just another winding road surrounded by tall trees and peaceful hills. But beneath the surface, untouched and unseen, a secret had been waiting all this time. It was early spring when a construction company was hired to make improvements near an old service turnout along the highway. The area had not been updated in many years, and erosion had caused parts of the land to weaken. The highway department decided it was time to reinforce the ground, replace aging concrete, and ensure the drainage system worked properly. It was a routine project, nothing unusual, nothing that suggested anything remarkable would happen. The crew arrived early one morning, the sunlight still soft and gentle. The air smelled of damp soil and pine trees. Birds made cheerful sounds from branches high above, unaware that something long hidden was about to be uncovered. Among the workers was a man named Mark Wilson, a quiet but friendly person who had been doing construction work for nearly 20 years. He enjoyed these peaceful outdoor jobs. There was something calming about working near nature, hearing the steady hum of machinery blending with the rustling trees. That morning, he climbed into the seat of a large excavator, preparing to dig into an area where old drainage concrete needed to be removed. Everything began normally. The excavator's bucket pressed into the soil, lifting sections of dirt and broken rock. Workers nearby carried tools, measured distances, and discussed plans for the day. It felt like any other job. The land looked stable and ordinary. No one imagined that something unusual lay beneath the surface. As Mark continued digging, his excavator struck something unexpected, metal but not the kind used in construction. The sound was different, almost hollow. He paused, frowning slightly. Metal wasn't strange on a job site, but this metal felt out of place. It didn't match any pipes or old materials listed in the site plans. Curious, he gently lowered the bucket again, clearing more soil from around the object. Slowly, as the dirt loosened, a strange outline began to appear. It was curved, weathered, and partly flattened. Mark's brow furrowed. This wasn't construction equipment. It wasn't a storage container. It wasn't anything he recognized from past work. He shut off the machine and stepped down from the cab. His boots sank slightly into the soft ground as he walked over. The other workers noticed his unusual stillness and gathered around him. "What did you hit?" one of them asked. "I'm not sure," Mark replied, "but it looks old, really old." They crouched beside the hole, brushing away more soil with gloved hands. Inch by inch, the shape became clearer. It was metal, covered in rust, with small fragments of faded paint clinging to its surface. Then someone spotted a curved edge that looked unmistakably like part of a wheel well. A quiet hush fell over the group. It was a car. Or rather, what remained of a car. The workers were careful not to disturb it further. They immediately contacted their supervisor, who then contacted the authorities. Within an hour, state troopers and investigators arrived, carefully cordoning off the area. The soft breeze carried whispers through the trees, as if the forest itself was watching something important unfold. The investigators approached the site with calm focus. They had seen many unusual things over the years, but finding a car buried under heavy concrete was not common. They studied the position of the vehicle, half crushed and pressed deep into the soil. It seemed clear that it had been there for a very long time. They worked slowly and respectfully, documenting every detail. The car's metal frame had rusted, but certain parts remained identifiable. They used tools to gently remove more dirt, revealing small hints beneath the debris. A section of the roof. What appeared to be the side door handle, the faint pattern of an old bumper. One of the investigators examined a tiny patch of color on the metal. It was blue, faded, but still visible beneath the rust. A chill of recognition passed through him. He remembered an old case from many years before. A missing mother, a young child, and a blue compact car. Could it be? The workers stepped back as the investigators continued clearing soil. Eventually, inside the collapsed frame, they spotted something that made their voices lower into soft murmurs. A small shoe. It was weathered by time and exposure, but its size clearly suggested it belonged to a child. Nearby was a scrap of fabric, faded but still showing a simple pattern that could have once belonged to a shirt or a seat cover. Everything pointed toward a historical disappearance. A quiet seriousness filled the air. No one spoke loudly. No one hurried. They knew they had uncovered something important, something connected to people who had been waiting for answers for decades. One of the investigators used a flashlight to look deeper into the vehicle's structure. He found a small metal plate, coated in rust but still readable. It was the vehicle identification number, the VIN. Slowly, carefully, he jotted down the numbers. He stepped aside and made a call, speaking in a low voice. When he returned, he looked at the team with a thoughtful expression. "It matches," he said calmly. "It's Linda Carver's car." For a moment, everyone was silent. The sound of wind through the trees seemed louder, as if nature itself was reacting to the news. The mother and son who had vanished 26 years ago had finally been found, not far from where they were last seen, hidden beneath a layer of earth and forgotten construction materials. The area where the car had been discovered was a spot rarely visited. It lay below the level of the road, near an old, incomplete drainage system from the early 90s. Over time, new concrete had been placed, soil had shifted, vegetation had grown thick, and the car had remained completely hidden from view. Though investigators could not say exactly how it happened, the clues suggested a quiet, tragic accident. Perhaps the car had slipped off the road at a curve. Perhaps the ground had given way beneath it. Whatever had caused it, the car had come to rest in a place where it was nearly impossible to see from above. And for 26 years, no one had known. As news spread through the department, a respectful sadness filled the conversation. Though the discovery could not change the past, it meant closure for a family that had spent decades living in uncertainty. By evening, word quietly reached Linda's sister, Rachel. The investigator who had first worked the case many years before, David Monroe, was notified as well. He sat alone on his porch, holding the phone in his hand long after the call ended. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples. David closed his eyes for a moment and breathed deeply. He had always hoped for this day. He had always wanted the family to have answers, even if the truth had been hidden for so long. Back at the construction site, workers and investigators finished securing the area for the night. The forest seemed strangely peaceful, almost thoughtful. The tall pines swayed gently, as if acknowledging that something once lost had finally been found. As the team prepared to leave, Mark Wilson stood near the edge of the site, looking at the quiet shape resting beneath the soil. He had uncovered many things in his work: old tools, broken pipes, forgotten foundations, but never something connected to a story like this. He felt a deep sense of responsibility, mixed with quiet gratitude that he had been part of bringing the truth to light. Far away in her home, Rachel sat at her kitchen table with trembling hands. She touched the photograph of Linda and Evan that always remained in a small frame beside a vase of flowers. Tears fell softly, not sharp tears of fear or confusion, but gentle ones, filled with a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. After 26 years, she finally knew where her sister and nephew were. She whispered, "Thank you," not to anyone in particular, but to the universe, to time, to the people who had never stopped caring. She hoped that now, at last, peace could begin to grow in the space where uncertainty had lived for so long. The discovery was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of understanding. Investigators still needed to gather information, complete reports, and study the site in detail. But one thing was now clear. The silence that had lingered for more than 2 decades was finally beginning to lift. And the land, which had guarded its secret for so long, had finally allowed the truth to rise into the open. In the days following the discovery of the buried car, a quiet but powerful ripple of emotion spread through everyone connected to the disappearance of Linda and her young son, Evan. The news touched many people: family members who had waited for answers, investigators who had never forgotten the case, community members who remembered the early days of the search, and even the construction workers who had unexpectedly become part of something far greater than a routine project. The investigation team returned to the site early the next morning. The sun was still low, casting long, gentle shadows across the land. A soft layer of dew covered the grass, making everything look fresh, as if the earth itself was preparing to reveal its story. The air felt calm, and the sound of birds filled the sky with peaceful chirps. It was a quiet start to a day filled with important work. The team stood around the buried car, speaking in low voices. Their work was not about uncovering mysteries for excitement. It was about respecting the lives connected to the vehicle. They wanted to understand how the car had ended up there and what clues time had preserved. One investigator named Sarah carefully stepped closer to the edge of the excavation. She was gentle by nature, always paying attention to small details. She had read through the original case files the previous night. The faded photographs of Linda and little Evan had stayed in her mind. As she looked down at the fragile remains of the car, she felt a quiet sadness mixed with determination. She wanted to bring understanding to a story that had remained silent for 26 years. The first task was to stabilize the area. Engineers measured the ground and made sure the car could be safely lifted without further damage. The soil around the car had shifted over the decades, and the old concrete had pressed against the vehicle. The team moved slowly, using tools designed for gentle excavation. Time had made the car delicate, like a fragile object preserved in the earth. As more soil was removed, the investigators gained a clearer view. The car was tilted at a downward angle, as if it had slid into the old culvert many years earlier. The spot was hidden from the road above by tall grass and thick brush. Even someone standing just a few feet away might not have been able to see what lay beneath. Sarah examined the position of the car and quietly shared her thoughts with the team. "It looks like it was an accident," she said softly. "The angle, the place, there's nothing here that suggests anything else." The others nodded in agreement. For all the years of theories and whispers, the truth appeared simple. The car had likely slipped off the road at a curve, landed in a spot hidden from sight, and been gradually covered by soil, time, and construction materials from old highway projects. No one had known because the land had changed, grown, and reshaped itself over the decades. As the investigation continued, the team found small objects inside the vehicle, items that belonged to Linda and Evan. A faded hair clip, a small plastic dinosaur toy, a soft piece of cloth that might have once been part of a child's seat cushion. Each item brought quiet emotion to the team, reminding them that behind this car was a family that had spent years searching for answers. These objects were treated with the great care one might give to something priceless. They were not evidence in the traditional sense. They were memories, fragments of lives that had once been filled with love and ordinary joys. Meanwhile, Rachel, Linda's sister, received updates about the investigation. Each call brought a mixture of feelings, sadness for what had been lost long ago, but also peace in knowing the truth was at last beginning to unfold. She spent much of her time reading old letters Linda had written, listening to the echoes of their shared past. Sometimes she would hold one of Evan's old drawings and trace the lines with her finger. She wondered how he might have grown over the years, what dreams he might have chased, and what person he might have become. These thoughts brought gentle sadness, but also a strange comfort. At least now she knew where he had been all these years. She knew he had never been alone in the wilderness. He had remained by his mother's side. Back at the investigation site, former State Trooper David Monroe arrived to see the area for himself. Though he had retired long ago, the department invited him because he had been one of the original investigators who tirelessly searched for the missing pair. When David stood at the edge of the turnout and looked down at the partially uncovered car, a wave of emotion washed over him. For years, he had wondered whether he had missed something. He had replayed the search efforts in his mind countless times. He had questioned whether he could have looked more closely, checked another area, searched more deeply. But now, seeing the location and understanding how hidden the car had been, he felt a gentle release of those old burdens. No one could have found it, he whispered to himself, not with the way the land was then. Another investigator approached him and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did everything you could," she said kindly. "Nature hid this place too well." David nodded slowly. The truth felt bittersweet, but it brought closure, not only for the family, but also for everyone who had carried the mystery in their hearts for so long. After the car was fully removed from the soil, it was transported to a secure location for further study. The investigators worked carefully, preserving every detail. They examined the undercarriage, the wheels, the position of the steering wheel, and the structure of the seats. Everything pointed toward a quiet accident, concealed by nature and forgotten by time. As the report began to take shape, investigators wrote their findings with care and respect. They avoided unnecessary speculation. They focused on the evidence, on the simple truth that the car had slipped into a hidden area during a time when safety barriers were not as strong as they are today. The road had changed since then, and improvements had been made, but in 1992, the curve had been sharp and unprotected. Once the investigation was complete, the authorities arranged a meeting with the Carver family. Rachel arrived with her parents, who now walked slowly, their steps softened by age. They sat together in a quiet room at the police department, holding hands tightly. They did not know exactly what they would hear, but they were ready to finally understand what had happened. The lead investigator spoke gently. She explained how the car had been found, how it had been hidden, and why it could not have been discovered sooner. She described the condition of the area and how nature had covered the site over the years. Throughout the explanation, Rachel listened with tears in her eyes. Not tears of confusion or fear, these were tears of release. After 26 long years, she finally had the answers that had remained painfully out of reach for so long. Her parents listened quietly as well. At one point, her mother placed her hand over her heart, as if holding something tender and precious inside. Her father stared at the floor for a long moment, then finally lifted his gaze and whispered, "Thank you." His voice was soft but sincere. Closure was painful, but it was also a gift they had hoped for in their quietest moments. The family left the meeting with a combination of sadness and peace. They knew that nothing could bring Linda and Evan back, but knowing the truth meant they could finally breathe without the weight of uncertainty. They could finally honor their memory with clarity. Soon after, the highway department reviewed the findings as well. Understanding how the car had landed in the hidden spot brought awareness to potential risks on certain parts of the road. Engineers inspected the area again, walking slowly along the edges, studying the curves and taking notes. They recommended strengthening the guardrails, expanding visibility, and updating signage to prevent such accidents from happening again. The improvements were not simply technical decisions, they were acts of respect. Acts meant to honor the lives of a mother and child who had unknowingly shown the need for safer roads. It was a hopeful thought, knowing that their quiet story might help protect others in the future. As the months passed, the community learned of the discovery through simple, respectful news articles. There were no sensational descriptions, only gentle explanations of how the mystery had been solved and how the family had finally found peace. People who remembered the early days of the disappearance felt a quiet sense of closure. They spoke kindly of Linda and her son, sharing stories of how warm and gentle she had been. Old coworkers remembered her bright smile. Neighbors recalled how Evan would run around their yard, laughing freely. These memories became part of the final chapter of their story, reminders that they had been real people, loved and cherished. David Monroe visited the final resting place of the car a few weeks later. The construction crew had cleaned the site and restored the natural landscape. Grass had begun to grow again, and the trees swayed softly in the breeze. David stood alone for a while, feeling thankful that the truth had finally surfaced. Meanwhile, Rachel planned a small memorial gathering. It wasn't a large ceremony, just close family and a few friends who had loved Linda and Evan dearly. They met at a sunny park, where the air felt warm and peaceful. People shared gentle stories, spoke about their memories, and expressed gratitude that the mother and son had finally been found. Rachel stood at the center of the gathering, holding a photograph of Linda and Evan. The picture showed them smiling on a bright summer day, their faces full of warmth and joy. She took a deep breath and spoke softly. "They may have been gone from our sight for many years, but they were never gone from our hearts. And now, at last, we know where they have been." Her words brought tears to many eyes, but they were tears filled with love, not fear. The moment felt healing, like the final page of a long, unfinished chapter. The discovery had not erased the sadness, but it had replaced uncertainty with understanding. It had brought truth out of silence and allowed the family to finally rest in the comfort of answers. The land along Highway 20 continued to stand tall and peaceful. The trees swayed as they always had, the sky stretched wide above, and the road carried travelers to their destinations. But now, beneath the surface of that calm landscape, the story of Linda and Evan had changed. The silence was gone. The unknown had become known. And the secret the land had held for so long had finally come to light. In the weeks after Linda and Evan's car was discovered, a sense of quiet understanding began to grow around everyone touched by their story. The mystery that had once felt heavy and impossible to solve had finally opened itself to the world. Now the focus slowly shifted from searching for answers to finding peace, honoring memories, and letting healing take its gentle place. The Carver family moved through this time with soft, thoughtful steps. Rachel often found herself sitting in her living room, holding the small frame that held Linda and Evan's picture. She would sit quietly, not speaking, but simply looking at their faces. Sometimes she smiled at the gentle expression in Linda's eyes, and other times she felt tears rise as she thought about the many years she had spent wondering where they were. The sadness was real, but so was the calm that came with knowing the truth at last. Her parents also found peace in their own ways. Linda's father spent more time in the backyard garden, watering the flowers and trimming plants the way he once did when Evan played nearby. Each afternoon, he would sit on an old wooden bench and think about the days when his grandson would run around the garden, laughing with boundless energy. Those memories remained precious, and now that the uncertainty was gone, they felt easier to hold without pain. Linda's mother found comfort in simple routines. She baked small batches of cookies the way she used to when Evan visited, even though she no longer had a little boy to share them with. She said the familiar smells brought back warm feelings, reminding her that love was never truly lost. It simply lived differently in the heart over time. The family decided to hold a small memorial service not to mourn, but to celebrate the lives of the mother and son they had loved so dearly. They chose a park filled with wide green fields and tall trees that whispered calmly in the wind. It was a peaceful place, bright during the day and gentle in the evenings. They wanted the setting to reflect the warmth and kindness Linda had carried throughout her life. Friends, neighbors, and people who had known Linda or Evan from years back attended the gathering. Some had been part of the original search efforts. Others had worked with Linda at the daycare center or lived near the family. Many people came simply because the story had touched their hearts. They wanted to show support, to remind the family that they had never been alone in their long journey. Folded chairs were placed in easy rows, and a small table at the front held framed pictures, a candle, and a vase of wildflowers. The candle's soft flame flickered gently in the mild breeze, as if honoring the moment with a quiet bow. The flowers had been chosen because they symbolized hope and remembrance. As people settled into their seats, the atmosphere felt calm and respectful. The air was warm with the light of the late afternoon sun, and the sounds of nature added a comforting background, rustling leaves, distant birds, and the soft hum of life continuing gently around them. Rachel stood slowly and stepped to the front. She held a small piece of paper in her hand, though she didn't really need it. Her voice was steady, filled with love as she began to speak. "Thank you," she said softly, looking at the group before her. "Thank you for being here today, for remembering Linda and Evan, and for sharing this moment with us." She paused, taking a calm breath before continuing. "For 26 years, our family lived with questions that felt too big to carry. We wondered where they were, what had happened, and whether we would ever know the truth. Every birthday, holiday, and quiet morning held a reminder that they were missing. But even during all those years, we never gave up hope, not because we expected answers, but because we loved them. And love keeps people close, no matter how much time passes." Her words drifted gently into the air, touching every heart in the audience. "When their car was found," she continued, "we finally felt a door begin to close, not in sadness, but in understanding. We learned that they had not been far away all this time. They were simply hidden by the earth, quietly resting in a place no one could see." Rachel looked down briefly, then lifted her eyes again, her voice filled with soft strength. "Today, we are here not to relive the sadness of their disappearance, but to celebrate the lives they lived. Linda was a loving sister, a caring daughter, and a wonderful mother. She had a way of making every person feel valued. Evan was bright, curious, and full of joy. He loved to explore the world, and he lit up every room he entered. Their time with us was short, but their love was wide, and it remains with us today." A few people wiped their eyes. Others nodded gently, remembering their own moments with the mother and child who had touched them long ago. When Rachel stepped back, Linda's father rose from his seat. Though age had slowed his steps, his presence carried quiet dignity. He walked to the front, holding one of Evan's small toy cars, the same ones he had lovingly saved all these years. He didn't speak for long. He simply said, "I kept this car for Evan. I kept it because I believed one day I would see him again. Now I know I won't see him here, but I believe I will see him again someday, and until then I will hold every memory close." He placed the toy car gently on the table beside the framed photographs. It looked small and simple, but in that moment it carried the weight of deep love. Next, a friend of Linda spoke. She shared a story about how Linda would stay late at the daycare center to help children who were shy or nervous. She talked about how Linda believed in kindness first, and how she had a special gift of making people feel understood. As she spoke, the audience smiled through their tears, grateful to remember the light Linda had brought to the world. The entire gathering felt like a warm blanket wrapped around the Carver family, a soft reminder that love does not disappear, even in the face of time and loss. When the service ended, people approached Rachel and her parents with gentle words, hugs, and quiet gestures of support. The sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the grass. The candle's flame flickered until it was softly blown out, symbolizing not an ending but a peaceful close to a long chapter. After the memorial, life returned to its natural rhythm. The family carried the peace they had gained, allowing themselves to heal slowly. Though the sadness never vanished, it changed shape. becoming something gentler, something that lived quietly at the edge of their daily lives rather than pressing heavily on their hearts. Elsewhere, the story continued to affect others. The highway department completed the improvements near the area where the car had been found. New guardrails were installed, signs were added, and the curve was made safer for drivers. These changes brought comfort to many people. They felt that in some small way, Linda and Evan's story had helped protect future travelers. Former investigator David Monroe also found his own form of closure. He often thought back to the early days of the case, remembering the long hours of searching and the frustration of coming up empty. Now, with the truth known, he felt a gentle pride that the effort had not been in vain. Even though the search hadn't revealed the car at the time, it had shown the community the depth of care people were capable of. And that, in its own way, had been meaningful. Sometimes, David would drive along Highway 20, slowing down near the curve where the car had been discovered. He didn't stop or speak. He simply looked out at the tall trees and peaceful landscape, offering a quiet moment of respect before continuing on his way. The construction workers who found the car also felt touched by the experience. Mark Wilson, the excavator operator, often thought about how he had stumbled upon something that had been hidden from the world for so long. He told his family the story, not for attention, but because he wanted them to understand that sometimes, even in the middle of an ordinary day, something extraordinary can happen. News of the discovery spread gently through nearby communities. It wasn't sensational or overwhelming. Instead, it was shared in soft tones as a story of closure, kindness, and the patience of time. People who heard it found themselves thinking about their own loved ones, their own hopes, and the importance of treasuring each moment. For Rachel, the years that followed became calmer. She began to write letters to Linda, not because she expected them to be read, but because writing helped her feel connected. She wrote about small things, how the weather was that day, what flowers had bloomed in the garden, or how she was learning new recipes Linda would have enjoyed. These letters became a gentle form of healing, a way to continue the relationship in a new form. Sometimes she also wrote letters addressed to Evan. She wrote about how big he would be now, how proud his grandparents would be, and how she imagined he would still have the same curious sparkle in his eyes. Writing to him made her feel close to the little boy who had brought so much joy to everyone around him. As time moved forward, the healing grew stronger. The pain softened. The memories stayed bright. And the truth, once buried deep beneath the earth, became a guiding light for everyone who had waited for so long. The land where the car had been found returned to its peaceful state. New grass grew over the disturbed soil. Wildflowers bloomed in the spring, painting the area with gentle colors. The forest hummed with life again. If someone walked by, they might never guess that the ground beneath had once held a secret that touched so many hearts. But nature remembers in its own quiet way. The soft wind carried whispers of closure, and the trees stood tall as silent witnesses to the story's final chapter. In the end, the tale of Linda and Evan became more than a mystery solved. It became a story of love, patience, community, and the quiet strength of hope. It showed that even when answers take years to arrive, they can still bring healing. It showed that a mother's love and a child's joy leave marks that time cannot erase. And it showed that sometimes the world reveals the truth in its own gentle, unexpected way. Their story, once filled with silence, now rested peacefully in the hearts of those who cared. And although Linda and Evan were no longer present in the world around them, their memory continued to shine, softly, warmly, and forever.